And welcome back, everybody, to the Fandom Zone. It is the most earth-shaking, groundbreaking, but never media show, money-taking, the man, the myth, the legend, the most electrifying villain in all of YouTube entertainment, Mr. Zod. And tonight I have quite a special guest. I'm super excited to have on Fandom Zone News. Mr. Pat Laprade is here with us tonight to talk about Andre the Giant and all sorts of subjects today. If you guys don't know, he wrote a book on Andre. He was on an HBO documentary about Andre. He did a lot of research and studying, and and just is very knowledgeable. And not only that, but I hear you're also knowledgeable in a lot of things WWE in general.
Yeah, well, I mostly research whatever happened in Montreal. I'm from Canada. I'm from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. For those who are wondering, my last name is pronounced Laprade. So it gets butchered.
I
all
knew
the time.
Zod was doing it wrong.
Yeah, it gets butchered all the time. Don't worry about it. Yeah, so I mean everything Montreal related. I wrote a book on the history of Montreal wrestling with Bertrand Hébert, my colleague. Wrote a book, a biography on Maurice Mad Dog Vachon. You mentioned the Andre book, and I also have a book on the history of women's wrestling with Dan Murphy. So I've been writing for like 8 years now, and it's really a real pleasure to work on those books and to discover the history of pro wrestling.
I was going to ask, what you're not around the same age as. I figure, how old were you when Andre wrestled?
Well, I'm 44, so Andre wrestled from 70. Well, from the late 60s to 1992. So. I was probably 16 when he 15 or 16 when he stopped wrestling, or when he passed away. So yeah.
Were you always into Andre, or was that something that happened when you got later in life?
Yeah, well, I mean, it happened because of the Montreal book I've written, in the sense that I started being known as the Montreal wrestling historian. So everything that touched Montreal, I was getting emails or phone calls, and my name, when the guys from HBO started working on the Andre doc, my name popped a few times. So they gave me a call, and after a few talks, we came up with the role I would be having on the documentary, which would be primarily to come with them in France, in Paris, to interview the family, because none of them could speak French. And I did a lot of research and translating stuff from French to English for them. And they decided that I would be part of the documentary as well, to talk about Andre's career in France and in Montreal, because I don't know if you knew, guys, but the first territory, the first city that Andre worked in North America was in Montreal. So it was a suburban called Verdun, and that was in June of '71. So and Montreal was always important in Andre's career and life, because of the French connection here. So that's why that because of the all the research I've done on Montreal wrestling, that's why I got into the Andre doc, and then the Andre doc gave us the opportunity to write a book on him.
Which that is just fantastic, and I wanted to say thank you, Susan. $5 super chat. She says, "Hey Zod, good to see you here, Susan. Hope you enjoy." Yeah, I was watching, and just fantastic, some fantastic work there. I've watched it twice, and I very rarely, especially with documentaries, sit all the way through something unless I really like it. Like, I've seen the Samurai documentary a bunch of times because I like that kind of stuff, but some powerful stuff, some very interesting details in there that I don't think most people would have known, because it's seeing the wrestler, but not seeing the man behind the wrestler is very hard to distinguish, especially with someone like Andre, this giant, the eighth wonder of the world. So, Father Zod, what do you have on the side of us for us here? Hold up.
Oh, okay. If you want to pull that up. Well, you know what? I kind of pulled this up because they have some interesting questions, and we could basically.
A
Well, is
lot
it
of
true?
myths. There's a lot of myths.
Right. That's why I wanted to ask you. Was it true that he was drafted by the French army?
No, he was
Oh,
actually, and that's a true story though. They couldn't find equipment, clothes, or boots that would fit him, so he got off of that because there were no clothes, uniforms that could actually fit him.
Wow.
and
So
we know that he.
that's a true story though.
And you know what I found amazing about him, Pat? A lot of people don't realize that when he first came into the wrestling scene, he was very agile and he could be flipped. I seen this one video of him being flipped over several times, which I thought I
Yeah,
would never see because he
he,
was
he
at
was
that time skinny.
he was leaner. He was leaner when he
Yep.
started, around 1966, 67. Is acromegaly, which is the disease, he had that made him,
Right.
with giant proportions. It didn't really kick in yet. I mean, it did, but not like, you would, like it would, in later years. And he hadn't started to drink as much, so he was a lot leaner. And he learned the European style, in Europe, in France especially. He learned the European style, where you would be more agile, and you would get body slammed a lot more. That's the one thing that all of his promoters in North America told him, from Paul Vachon for Grand Prix Wrestling in Montreal to Vince McMahon Sr., didn't want him to get body slam. But whenever Andre wanted to get body slammed by someone, that would be, it wouldn't mean that you get Andre's stamp of approval. If he was letting you body slam him, especially when he started working full time for Vince Senior, that was a big thing. But back in Europe, it would happen, more often because they weren't booking him like the giant that Vince Senior booked him in the mid-70s in the US.
You know what you always hear in wrestling that you have a bunch of tough men. Was there any men that Andre was actually afraid of?
Not really, although there were rumors that he didn't want to start a fight with Haku, who he teamed with in later in his
Nobody wanted to
career.
start a fight with Haku.
No, exactly. The funny thing about Haku, because he worked Montreal before joining WWF in the mid '80s. He was a tremendous heel here, and I interviewed him once, and I told him, I'm hearing all kind of stories, like you did this and you did that, and those stories seem so unbelievable, So what's true, what's not? And every time I was coming up with a story, he would tell me, well, something like that happened, and then another story, well, something like that happened. So I was like, oh, okay, so they're all true stories. That's amazing. So yeah, you didn't want to mess with Haku, but other than that, I mean, I don't think Andre really feared anyone really. But I mean, he wasn't looking for trouble. That's one thing is for sure. He wasn't looking for a fight. But if a fight was coming to him, well, he could handle himself.
I mean,
when you think about his drinking is legendary.
Yeah,
So you think a case of beer to him was like a 6-pack to everybody else. And
pretty much.
was he a good drunk, or did he get bad, or?
Yeah, he would drink so much that sometimes he would just pass out. He would pass out at the bar, and there's a famous story where where they put a table over him, like just to cover him up, because he just fell asleep on the floor in the bar, and there was no way for him for any of the wrestlers to move him, right? So,
Wow.
but you got to remember one thing is that Andre didn't fit in anything, right? So let's say he's wrestling, and then he's going back to the hotel. The hotel, the bed is not made for him. The shower is not made for him. So the only place that he really fits is in a bar drinking, kind of forgetting about his problem later in life, kind of using it against the pain he had. So drinking became his best friend, because that's the only thing that he not that he was good at, but that he could do after the matches, instead of just staying in his hotel room that wasn't made for him, that didn't fit him. But there's famous stories of him drinking, I don't know, 100 and something beers in one sitting, and you hear that story from so many different people. It's like if everybody was there that night, everyone in the business was there that time where he drinks. So there's people saying, oh yeah, it happened in Florida, it happened in New York, it happened there. It probably happened only once, but it's the kind of stories that it's been told and retold so many times that everyone was there, or everyone is saying now that was there, because it became so legendary. But he was drinking a lot. Yeah, I mean, he could do it for the show. I mean, sometimes he would just make a show of himself, whether it was drinking or eating.
Hey, Lee, can you pull up T Virus Terrence? He has something I like Pat to see. He says Andre's friend and manager said he would talk to Andre a lot, and Andre spoke about wanting to be normal, like a regular sized guy. That part, heart by heart.
Oops, sorry.
Kind of knocked it off. Okay, that part, heart by heart, that Andre was sad at some point.
Yeah. I mean, he would have traded. He often said that he would give everything he had to live like a normal human being only once, because that it never happened to him. Everywhere he was going, whether he was known or not, or before he became that well-known pro wrestler, everyone was pointing at him. Everyone, Andre couldn't hide under a hat and a pair of sunglasses. He was
Right.
still 6'11", 7 foot, 6'10", around that. He was still 300 something pounds. So I mean, he had no privacy. He had, everywhere he was going, he would be pointed at. He would be touched. Babies would cry, or kids would cry. And when he became known, well, it was even worse, because now people wanted his autograph. People recognize him because of what he did. And plus, he couldn't fit anywhere. He just couldn't have a normal life like any of us has.
I remember the
So
yeah. I remember the
no, no, go
first
ahead,
time
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I remember the first time I seen him on TV. He was in the Incredible Hulk. He played
Hmm.
Bigfoot. I don't know if you remember that, but that was the first time that people really was introduced to him, and he was just such a big guy. And then I realized that they said that in 1974 he made $400,000. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. He
That's
was
incredible.
making a lot of dough back in those days. Actually, that's the funny thing. He made the Guinness Book of World Records, not because of his size, but because of the money he earned.
And that's what this
And
article, yeah, that's what this says right here.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, yeah, he started making movies, but he did movies in France too. Back in 67, 68, he did a movie in France as well.
Right.
And he played. When he played Bigfoot in the $1 Million Man. I mean, that was that was that was a big thing for him. But his best or his best and biggest role he ever had was in Princess Bride. But
Yes.
it was late in his life, and that's really too bad because in Princess Bride, I think he kind of realized he had found a calling there, and because Andre, as much as he liked wrestling, he liked. I think even more being around the boys, being in a locker room, playing cards, drinking, going to do his match, going back to the locker room, because it was the only place on earth where Andre would feel like a normal person because everybody was treating him as such. He was one of the boys, he was one of the wrestlers. And he kind of found that same feeling on the set of Princess Bride, to the point that I'm pretty sure that if that role would have come, I don't know, 10 years earlier in his life, that maybe he would have done a switch to acting instead of keep putting bumps into his body like he did with pro wrestling.
Right.
Maybe he would have lived a little longer. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, acting, especially in The Princess Bride, he really like how other people treating him there, and he felt like if he was in a wrestling locker room.
Hey, PB, do you have any questions you want to ask? Lee?
Hold
I mean,
on. Yes, I have one question. It's very
Yes.
important. Yeah, I'm still here. I just had to get off mute for a second, guy. It's in the background.
No
I didn't
problem.
want my background noise, messing with your ears like it does.
No problem.
Is it true that he would drink and then go outside and tip people's cars over?
That's two different stories. He would sometimes he would. I mean, in his earlier days, he was strong enough to lift small cars. But I think those stories have been exaggerated over time. But if it was a small car, and back in his earlier days when he had more strength in his arms, he could. I mean, he could lift. From the side of a car, he could flip, kind of not flip over, but at least lift the side of the car and then just push it so it flipped over. But it would have, it had to be a small car. He would have done that with a big truck or something. But there was a time where he was able to do so. But those stories have been a lot exaggerated with time. There's no doubt
Well,
about
I'll
that.
tell you, one of the
Well, I
things
mean,
that I found when I'm sorry, go PB. I'm sorry.
well, all I was going to say is I can't tip over a UTV, so tipping over a small car, that takes one hell of a man.
Well, I don't see you. I don't see. I can see you now, but I'm pretty sure you're not 7 foot, 350 pounds either. That
Yeah,
No.
that
I thought it
helps.
was.
That
Hey,
that helps a
Pat, I thought
little.
it was. Yeah, Pat, I thought it was funny when you said, "Oh, that was just exaggerated. He only tipped over small cars."
Well, yeah,
So,
but I mean, and what is exaggerated is the number of times they actually did it. It's another thing. It's like it seems like everyone's car was tipped over by Andre once in his life. That
But what
didn't
about that
happen.
one angry guy who comes out, right? He gets done, he comes out from wherever he's going. Maybe Andre had that wild night out of the town, right? Comes out and he's like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna go home." What the hell? Who tipped over my how do you say
Yeah,
like, who tipped over my car?
and
yeah.
what do
I'm
you
just
do
saying.
about it?
Yeah,
There's not
You're
much
asking
to
for his.
do. There's not much to do. You call a towing company. That's all you can actually do.
And one thing I heard, and I'm pretty sure this must be true because I've heard it so many wrestlers say it, but Andre liked to pay for everybody.
Oh yeah. That was true. You couldn't. I mean, Bob Backlund is perhaps one of the only ones who was paying his round from time to time because he would threat Andre like, if you don't let me pay the next round, I'm just leaving, so you'll drink alone. And Andre didn't want to drink alone. He always wanted the guys to stay for another round, another beer. So, but from time to time, Bob Backlund would do that. But aside from him, pretty much, you couldn't pay if you were with Andre, because it was generous. It was generous of his time. It was generous of his money. My favorite story with Andre regarding money and how generous he was. You might find it weird, but you'll understand when I get by the end of it. When he was still in Paris, and he was just learning the ropes, he wasn't making money, or barely. So he was working as a bouncer in the Red District in Paris. So he was working as a bouncer for strip clubs, and he was also running some errands for prostitutes and stuff like that. And sometimes Andre didn't have a roof to sleep under, so he would sleep in a metro station and stuff like that. But some other times, one of the prostitutes would tell him to come by her place and just sleep on the floor, so at least he has a roof to sleep under. 20 years later, he's in Montreal with Gino Brito, former wrestler, promoter, friend of Andre. And they are like at the Ritz-Carlton, which is one of the nicest hotels in Montreal. So money is no issue, by that time. Andre is making a lot of money. So they at the bar of the hotel, and there's a girl who comes in, and her clothes all ripped off, and she's crying and all that. So Andre looks at her and he goes, what happened? And she explains that she got roughed up by a guy, and he took all his money, and she got attacked and everything. So Andre reached to his pocket. There was maybe, I don't know, $700-800 there. He gave it to the girl. And Gino Brito looks at him and he goes, why did you just do that? And he explained, that back 20 years before in Paris, that prostitutes helped him a lot, when he didn't have anything. So it was a way for him to give back to someone who was doing the same thing. So to me, that story is amazing because, obviously that wasn't, she wasn't the one who helped him 20 years earlier, but he wanted to give back, and he never forgot where he came from, and he did. There were wrestling promoters who helped Andre in his beginning, and Andre was always there when they needed help. So that was the kind of person he was.
I had a quick question from someone. Susan had asked, how did Andre feel about the match with Hulk Hogan where Hulk body slammed him? Because I find that interesting, because even in the documentary, it felt like he was, as we would call it on the internet, trolling him about it. He wouldn't tell Hulk, from how I gathered, which way he landed, and he told Vince, don't say anything to him. You know what I mean? He was just like he had this plan in his mind, but he was just going to let it naturally unfold. So do you think that it was part of the plan? He always had this thing, or do you think that he decided at the last minute? Because that's been a big thing everyone's asking over.
It was always the plan. Hogan knew about it. I mean, that's one of the things that myself and the HBO team disagree on. And if you read the book, we go somewhere else with this, because from all I know, Hogan knew about what was going to happen in the match. It's just that Andre started playing in Hogan's head. He was just ribbing him. That was Andre. You got to remember, this was a guy who did some weird pranks. That's a guy who he was very good friends with Dusty Rhodes. And one of the pranks he did to Dusty once is to bring him to a bordello, whatever you call it, where there's prostitutes, and in New Orleans, and the lights, he closed the lights, and he peed on Dusty Rhodes' head, and he thought it was the most funniest thing ever. And Dusty is like, "What do you want me to say? What do you want me to do? It's Andre." That was his only answer. It's Andre. So playing in Hogan's head like he did, that was Andre as well. That was just Andre just wanting to. He knew it was important for Hulk. He understood what WrestleMania 3 meant for WWF, for Hogan as well, kind of the passing of the torch. He understood all of that. He understood the importance the match would have, and that's why he wanted in. But he knew that Hogan was kind of nervous about it, so he just started playing in Hulk's head, and that's pretty much what happened. So there was never a time where Andre would have not done the job. There was never a time where Hogan didn't know what would happen. The body slam was always planned. Everything was planned. It's just that at one point, Hogan didn't know anymore if Andre would actually go along with what was planned. That was the big thing, because Andre was so good at playing in Hogan's head. But when we spoke to Pat Patterson about this, because he was at the time a lot involved with the booking of that match. For him there was no doubt about what really went on, and this is exactly what I just told you.
Did you meet Andre's daughter?
I met her once at the premiere of the movie, of the documentary in LA. But she when I contacted her to interview her formally for the book, I want to say she declined, but she never formally declined. She just said she would think about it and just never got back to me. Was
she close to her? Was she close to her father?
No, I mean, no. She would have wanted, but she was young, and at first Andre didn't recognize her as his daughter. After the test and everything, when it was sure that he was the father, he wanted to spend more time with her. But at the same time, it was hard. She was living in Seattle. He was living on the East Coast in the Carolinas. I mean, he was traveling the world, and what was tougher is that they just couldn't go to Disneyland together. It was Andre the Giant. It would have been hell for her to spend a day with Andre in a big public place like this, so meeting her was something that was more difficult, but from all accounts, Andre wanted to be a father for her, but things didn't happen that way, and I think that she would have wanted Andre to be a better father for her, but I know that I think that she is kind of in peace with that now. I'm hoping she is fully, and but she's very proud of representing her father now. So hopefully there's that. Yeah.
Now, before we close this story out, I'd just like to ask you about the book. When you wrote the book, did you find out a lot of things that you never knew as you were researching?
Yes. But mostly, one of the goals we had was to debunk all the myths surrounding Andre. So that was a lot of research, because we wanted to explain why there was a myth, why there was a story, and we wanted to see if it was true or not, and then explain what the real story was. So because of that, we had, there's a lot of things that we were able to find out. So those were new to me. There's a lot of stuff regarding his family, because of the documentary, I was able to meet his family again, and his brothers, and know a lot of stuff that I didn't know about his early years, about his childhood, about his early days in pro wrestling. But of course, everything he did, let's say from 1980 to his passing, it was stuff that I was mostly a fan for. So I knew I had read about that already. But yeah, there was a lot of stuff that I learned, throughout research and interviewing people.
Oh, well, I appreciate you talking to us about Andre, and I wanted to move on to another story because you had a book where you put a lot of you talked about a lot of other stuff. And did you ever get into the Dino Bravo murder?
Yes, I was part of
And
the Dark Side of the Ring episode on Dino Bravo last year. I pretty much did the same thing I did for Andre. I was interviewed for it, interviewed people off camera, and I also did a research for them as well. Yeah.
well, just so you know, I ran with some pretty shady characters back in the '90s, and Vince McMahon would tell everybody that because he has. And one of them, in New York, they had the stamp that you put on top of the cigarettes. What they would do is buy them off the Indian reservations. They would use an illegal stamp. The Israeli mafia would. And then they
Yeah.
would send the cigarettes over the border into Canada. And the woman that ran that, one time we just happened to be talking about Dino, and she basically said that Dino got too big for his shoes and basically thought he was tougher than he was. And he wasn't tougher than some bullets in his head. So would you basically say that's what happened to him?
Yeah, I mean, Dino thought he was invincible. That was his biggest problem going into organized crime, is that he was Dino Bravo. He was a wrestler in Montreal since 1972. He was a big star from 1980 to the early 90s. He was Dino Bravo. I mean, to us in Montreal back in the early 80s, he was our version of Hulk Hogan before Hulkamania started. So he was that big of a deal, one of the most popular wrestlers ever to wrestle in Montreal, and he wasn't afraid of anything or anyone. So he had that Italian blood in him. He would get into fights in bars and clubs. His uncle was Frank Cotroni, and his uncles were Frank Cotroni and Vic Cotroni's, who were the Vic was the head of the Montreal Mafia back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. But the Cotronis had nothing to do with either Dino going into organized crime or being killed. But he did a few mistakes, or there were a few mistakes done that were pinned on him, that cost the organization a lot of money. And even if you're Dino Bravo, you don't do mistakes that's gonna cost the organization a lot of money. So he got killed because of that. He got killed because there were mistakes done, and it was part of his fault or his fault entirely, and that's why they got rid of him.
And they pretty much think someone that he knew did it because they got in the house and they got that close to him.
Yeah,
and they must have been scared of him because they made sure they shot him in the head several times because they didn't want him to get up. So
that was more of a message that was sent to him. I guess. But I know. I mean, it was someone who Dino knew. That's why there's no infraction. There was not a window break. He didn't force the door or anything. He was watching the Montreal Canadiens. He was a big hockey fan, and he was just watching the Montreal Canadiens on TV. And he got surprised. He didn't see it coming.
When I was 12 years old, I remember looking in the paper, and the first team I ever looked at were the Montreal Canadiens with Guy Lafleur, Steve Shutt, and all those great players. And for years, I loved the Montreal Canadiens, and I didn't know why, because it was the first team I ever looked at in the newspaper.
That's funny.
But I always remember Ken Dryden. I always
Yep.
remember those players because they were, my son's like, who the hell are these guys? Right now he's thinking, Dad, stop talking about
My-
hockey. Nobody wants to hear about hockey.
My,
But anyway,
it's funny you say that because my next book is going to be on hockey, and it's going to be a biography of a former Montreal Canadiens captain from the 1940s and 1950s, a guy named Butch Bouchard, who was his son was playing with Guy Lafleur and Ken Dryden back in the 70s. Pierre Bouchard. So, so I'm going to be. That's going to be my next book. I'm going out a little of the wrestling world. I will come back, but I always wanted to write about hockey once, so that was my my window of opportunity, and I'm working on it right now.
and
I
they always
mean,
talked about. I'm sorry. They always talked about enforcers, but to me, Larry Robinson was probably the greatest enforcer I ever seen. And
Yeah,
Yeah.
my dad would disagree with that. He would probably say John Ferguson was the greater enforcer that he ever seen, but Robinson could held his own. When he was tall. Robinson was like 6'4". So
plus he
so
could
it was.
play.
Oh yeah,
Plus
yeah,
he
he
could
was.
play.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. One of the better defensemen in the history of the Montreal Canadiens and the NHL. So yeah, totally.
I'm sorry, Lee. Zod, what was that?
oh, he's catching on. No, I mean, pseudo names. Anyways, uh, yeah, I was gonna say I find it interesting the trajectory that you take, right? Because you start doing wrestling stuff, but you get into hockey, and it's like it's funny how you start on one thing and you kind of end up over here, because you just that's what you like to do. But my question was gonna be about Dino. I find it interesting. Was he in the mob before wrestling or after wrestling? And why?
I,
That's a huge transition.
yeah, yeah. It was maybe the last year was in the business that he started being involved, but maybe not even the last year. Maybe the last 6 months or so. I mean, he was making so much money with Vince that wrestling was all he knew. Wrestling was really all he knew. He had started as a teenager. He had started, in the early 70s and didn't do anything else in life. And he was making a lot of money in Montreal. He did even more work when he started working for WWF. He had a big house in suburban Montreal, 2 big cars and everything. And when he realized that Vince wouldn't keep him anymore, he didn't want to lose all he had. He didn't want to lose his lifestyle. And his wife was against it. His wife was like, we don't need that big of a house. We don't need, that many cars, or, we can just live a simple life. But he was Dino Bravo. He didn't want to live a simple life. So there's not a lot of jobs that you can do that can make you a lot of money.
Yep.
The kind of money to keep that lifestyle. So the organized crime was something that was, I guess, easy for him to get in. But it was never like it was never his dream. It was never his intention. It's just something that he decided to do because he wanted to keep living the life he had. That's a wrong. Obviously, that was a bad decision he took, but that's the one he decided to take.
Is it myth or fact? Could Dino really bench 715 pounds?
Myth.
I
He could bench press like close to 600, or like well over 500. He was really strong. But that was gimmick, that was just a gimmick. Yeah.
And you know what? When you bench 600 pounds, you don't really have to lie about it. I mean, 600 pounds, not many men can bench 600
apparently
pounds.
you do. Like 600 pounds ain't 700 pounds.
Yeah. It's always to get the number, bigger. So no one can actually claim to be stronger than Dino. Because, if Dino could do, I don't know, 550 on the bench press, probably some other guys in a gym somewhere could do 550, right? But no one will do 700. So it's always, to find a number that could be credible, but at the same time, that could be so high that you're sure that no one will ever beat it, So
What kind of guy was he? Was he a nice guy, or was he a guy full of himself?
It depends who you talk to. He was a nice guy, but at the same time, he had a temper. He had a short temper. He was known for that. He was going to the Montreal Forum to watch a game, and he would get. There was a big rivalry in Montreal between Montreal and Quebec City, which is like two cities, like 2 hours and a half from each other, and there was a big rivalry there, And he would get his tickets. His seats were like just behind the opposing team bench. And one time he got into almost a fight with the other team's coach because, he was so into the Montreal Canadian. He had his short temper, and nothing was gimmick there. It was really
that wouldn't be a pretty
just him being Dino. Yeah. So he was he is probably the reason why Andre left Montreal back in 1982, because he wasn't getting along with Andre. His temper was probably his worst enemy in the business. But at the same time, if you talk to his daughter and his wife, he was a nice man who was who was a good father for his little girl. But he had like I said, he was Dino Bravo, and he had the lifestyle, and he had the Italian short temper that he had. So it always depends who you talk to.
He had to have been at least somewhat of a nice guy if he let his own murderer in his front door.
Well, I just think he didn't see it coming. I just think he didn't know that this guy was coming to shoot him.
I'm not being serious. It's just a joke.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry here. Exactly. Wow, I didn't catch that sarcasm. I'm so sorry. I feel dumb.
That's okay.
I feel like but he was he was who he was. Both Andre and Dino, I never had the chance to meet with them. Dino was Dino.
It's always the friend too. In the mafia, it's always the person that you think you could trust most that's been assigned to come not take you out.
Yeah.
And it's been that way forever.
I'm saying yes. I'm saying yes, like I'm myself involved, which I'm totally not. But that's what you read about. That's what you read about. That's what I see in the movies. That's why I said yes.
Yeah.
Now he's covering. He's like, this is how it goes in the movies, not real life.
I better go now and lock my doors, right?
You have to know what to say about them and when to say it about them. Yeah. I worked with this one guy, had 2 fingers cut off on his hand because he wasn't Italian. And if you weren't Italian, they had to cut your fingers off if you wanted to be associated with them. So it would take 2 of your fingers off right here, these 2 fingers. And that's how you could tell in Brooklyn or in Queens if someone was associated with the mafia.
See?
If they were missing their 2 fingers. So
I don't know for you guys, but I'd rather write about those guys than be one of them.
Yes.
So,
it's
a lot easier on my fingers.
Now, our next conversation is going to be about something. What I really respect about you is there was a lot of things said about Pat Patterson.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone came to me and they mentioned it to me and they said, oh, Lee, you got to check this guy out, and that's how we met, you and I. Yep. We started the conversation off about Pat Patterson. And then you made some good points. I thought you made some good points. And here's what I believe. I believe what Pat Patterson did was sexual harassment on the job. There's no doubt about it. But you kind of put it in another light, which I can understand. It was the 70s, it was the 80s, and things were a lot different than they are now. But why is it that, you knew Pat? You gave me some pictures of you being with Pat and everything. So why is it that you really believe that Pat really got he really didn't deserve what happened to him?
Because Pat was such a loving and caring character. I mean, he had a weird sense of humor. Pat, you had to be around Pat to know that. You had to know him to know that, yes, sometimes his jokes weren't always funny. But like the joke I just said about Andre with Dusty Rhodes, all pranks weren't that funny back in the days. Pat Patterson did some pranks, ribs, that could be seen as not funny with today's eyes, but he had that weird sense of humor in him that probably put him in trouble in the sense that it's not everyone who understood that. And he had a weird sense of humor about his own sexuality. I mean, he never went public with it back in the 80s or 90s. But everyone in the business, everyone around the business knew that Pat was gay. And he had a weird sense of humor about himself being gay. So when I read some stuff like, oh yeah, he was looking at me and biting his lips and all that, I do believe that. I do believe that happened. It was Pat's weird sense of humor to make you feel uncomfortable. I told you that story, Lee, and I'll say it here as well. Maybe five years ago, we're in Vegas for a big wrestling reunion, and there's a bunch of us at the bar, and we're sitting just chatting, and I have a pink shirt on, and Pat looks at me at one point during the evening, and he goes, "Hey, Laprade, what's up with the shirt? Are you gay?" And I'm like, "No, Pat. I'm pretty sure I'm not gay." "Oh, you're pretty sure, so you're not 100% sure." And I was like, "No, Pat. I'm positive I'm not gay." And then someone else stepped in and looked at Pat and goes, "Pat, I think that's some wishful thinking from your part." And everybody started laughing, and that was the end of it, because I just didn't get into Pat jokes. I knew him. I knew what kind of jokes he would do, and he was just trying to make me feel uncomfortable, which I was not, but I was still answering him, and that's what
it's better having him doing that to you than Andre pissing on your head.
I do agree with that. I do agree with that. And Pat, and when I was thinking about it, that very same night, I was like, see, probably there's some people who would have thought that Pat was trying to hit on me, which he wasn't at all. But I couldn't understand if someone who doesn't know Pat, who doesn't know that he's just trying to make you feel uncomfortable, that he was trying to hit on someone. So I can't even imagine the kind of ribs or pranks that he was doing back in the 80s and early 90s, when ribs were it was all in the open, and these ribs have changed over years. Pranks and wrestling has always been together. There's like some very nasty pranks that have been done in pro wrestling. Mr. Fuji's pranks were like, probably the worst. But there was also pranks in Calgary that were really bad. And Pat grew up in the business at the time where pranks and ribs were like part of the culture, part of the wrestling culture. And they were not always funny, but they were of their time. If you didn't know Pat, but you knew he was gay, you could get the wrong signal from what Pat was trying to actually do. Not only that, Pat grew up in a time where you needed to be tough to be in the business. And the old timers would try to test that toughness. So making you uncomfortable was part of a ritual where, well, if you're not, like, if you're going to be uncomfortable for something like this, maybe you're not made to be in the business, and it would go to other extent. Sometimes you would get roughed, in training or in the ring, but that's another story. But that was just part of, what the era was, even in the 80s, early 90s. But in real life, Pat was such a caring and loving person. He had the same boyfriend for so many years, and Pat was, especially in the 80s when AIDS started to started to be known. Him and Louis, who was his longtime life partner, they decided that they would be exclusive to another. That they wouldn't fool around. That it would be just the two of them, because they were so afraid to catch AIDS, because AIDS was a lot spread in the gay community at the time, although it wasn't only the gay community, but it was a lot back in the early 80s. So they started getting exclusive. So Pat would have not fooled around with a wrestler or a crew member, because of that reason. Also, Pat was Pat and Louis. I mean, Pat loved kids. Obviously, back in the days, him and Louis couldn't adopt kids like a gay couple could actually do today. But I'm like positive, and Pat said that once, that if it was another time, that probably would have wanted to adopt kids, because he really liked kids. So when I read stuff, when unfortunately your brother passed away, Lee, when I started reading stuff about Pat being a monster, and Pat being a sexual harasser, that he would harass kids and all that, I had to step up and say something, because I know for sure, not pretty sure, for sure, that Pat wasn't that kind of man. But he was gay. He was an easy target. That's why when that whole thing happened with Terry Garvin and Mel Phillips, Pat decided to quit. He was never fired. Pat decided to. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me read it, and I'm going to read this to you. And you know what? I'm just reading this to you because this is what's out there. And you know what? I'll be honest with you. The only person I believe is my brother. I don't, I believe it, that a lot of, when my brother's lawsuit came out in 1992, a lot of people jumped on his coattails, and they came out with their own lawsuits, ridiculous lawsuits. And most of them were, but he just, and this is something Tom said, and this is about Pat. He'd say he'd look at you when you were talking, when he was talking to you, he'd look at your crotch, he'd lick his lips and shit. He'd make sexual gestures by looking at you like that. He'd put his hands on your ass and squeeze your ass and stuff like that. He would check you out like you were a chick. And my brother, one thing I know I loved about my brother, he was not a liar. And this was in his depositions. This was always what he said. But then when I think about what you said, Tom was always willing, when he went back and talked to Vince or Linda, they basically put him they brought him in a room without lawyers, and he said, "Okay, I'll sign the papers where Pat can come back," and Pat came back to work. But Tom always did tell me that Pat was the least of the problem, and the biggest problem I have though is with Pat would be the fact that he had to know that these kids were at ring size with Mel Phillips. He was, he was the booker. He was at a lot of those shows. Some of these shows were at Madison Square Garden, and this is what I would say to Vince McMahon too. Vince McMahon was at the Garden when the Garden shows went down, and these boys were at the Garden when the Garden shows went down. So all these people had to see these boys, and no one said nothing.
Well. First off, the things that your brother said, I don't dispute them at all. I just look at them in a different set of eyes. To me, those things were part of Pat's weird sense of humor, trying to make a young kid uncomfortable, trying to see if he had, what it takes to be in the business and all that, all what I said in the first part of, talking about Pat. That's what I believe happened there. About Mel Phillips, Pat always said that he didn't know, and I do believe him, because Pat would have never let that happen, never in a million years, because Pat had worked so hard as a wrestler. Because when Pat started to travel around, some promoters heard about Pat being gay. It was in the 50s, and in the 60s, it was not as well accepted as it is today. And a lot of those promoters would come up to Pat and they would say, "Yeah, I heard some stuff about you." And Pat would always say, "Well, these are true, but you'll never have any problem with me." And they never did. They never did, because Pat wasn't like that. Pat wasn't going to be someone that a promoter would have trouble with. He was there to work. He was there to perform. And that's what he did, and he was damn good at it, and that's why promoters liked him so much. So so Pat would have. I mean, he had to work so hard to make sure that his reputation would be like this, that he would have never let someone like, if he would have known, he would have not let Mel Phillips do what he did. And that I'm positive about that, because he had worked so hard to not have this kind of reputation, because he knew as a gay person that he would get a lot of problems, and that's what I was saying, is that's why he quit when that happened, not because he felt guilty about it, not at all, because he didn't know and he wasn't part of what Phillips and Garvin were doing, but because go ahead.
Here's the thing that I would have the problem with.
Yes.
Vince McMahon and Linda McMahon admitted that they knew that Mel had trouble with the boys. They fired Mel for having trouble with the boys, and then about 6-7 months later, they took Mel back. So if Linda knew and Vince knew, Pat was their right-hand man. He would have to know.
Well, that's an assumption to make. That said, there's two different occasions here. So what I've read and what from talking to Pat, what at the time when Phillips got fired the first time, what Pat thought of was, or what his impression of what happened was that. He felt like Phillips was being unnatural. That's the word he used. Unnatural around young boys. So he had no problem Mel coming back to work for WWF, but he wanted to make sure that Mel would be kept out of the young boys. So that's what he suggested. We can bring him back. We got to make sure that he's not around any of our young boys. So to me, I know that you can look at it with today's eyes, saying, "Oh well, he must have known because that's a proof he knew." No, he felt like Mel Phillips was being unnatural around boys, and he didn't want that to happen. So he didn't mind bringing him back as long as he was not around them then. And you got to remember, this is like late 1980s when There wasn't like a HR department like you have now. It wasn't. I
Right.
mean, things were. It was a total different era, and probably today Mel Phillips would have never been back. That's for sure. That's not even probably. That's for sure. At the time, it was different, and didn't have any lawyers to or HR person to tell them, well, maybe that's not a good idea. They but to me, I see this as Pat not wanting anything to happen to the young boys, because he would have not said that. He would have not allowed Mel Phillips to come back, knowingly that knowing what he would have done. And even if Vince, I mean, I will not talk about Vince. I don't know what Vince knew or didn't know, but I know for sure that Pat didn't know about that, and that he would have never let that happen. That wasn't him. That wasn't in him at all. And he didn't try to protect Mel Phillips. He didn't try to protect Terry Garvin. That's another myth. People believe that Pat Patterson was like best buddy with Terry Garvin. He wasn't. It probably is the closest person he was in the company was Vince McMahon. That's probably the if there was one best buddy he had in the company, it was Vince. It was never Terry Garvin. He wasn't even the one who hired Terry Garvin. And in
Well,
later years, just 1 second. And
sure.
in later years, he didn't even want to talk about Terry Garvin, because he didn't approve of what he did. And I know that what Phillips and Garvin did are two different things. But what Garvin was accused of was to exchange, jobs and booking for sexual favors, and that's something that Pat never did, because if he had, he would have lost the locker room. He was the head booker.
Right.
He would have lost the locker room, and he never did. He never did, and that went on for like another 10, 15 years. So Pat never did that. Did Pat say that? Sometimes, yes, because Pat would sometimes joke about that, or you got to remember that Pat was solicited a lot. Everyone that wanted to get a job with WWF was trying to get in the company through Pat, because they know he was the head booker, and especially here in Montreal. A lot of the guys in Montreal, you don't know how many times I heard the story of a local guy that none of you know, that told me, oh yeah, I could have been signed with WWF, but I refused to drop my pants in front of Pat Patterson. And when I first started in the business, I was, oh yeah, really? Oh, okay, I didn't know that. And when you grow in the business, and you talk to other people, and then I started knowing Pat and all that, I was like, no, that never happened. But these guys, it was easier for them to say that that it was Pat's fault, because he was gay, so it was an easy, believable story to say, than being honest about themselves. And saying, well, you know what? They just didn't want me. They just didn't want to hire me. And not only that, yeah, go ahead, Lee.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, and one thing about that, it don't matter whose pants you dropped. If you didn't have the talent, Vince McMahon will not let you wrestle.
At the end of the day, you're right. And Pat sometimes would say that as a way to get rid of someone who was too persistent. Some just didn't get it. Some didn't want to hear no from Pat. So after, I don't know, a few meetings, a few phone calls or whatever, Pat, in knowing that person would just stop calling if he would say that, he would say it. Well, you know what? If you want a job, you know what to do. And it was an era where couch casting was like everywhere in Hollywood and all that. So I mean, so Pat just said that, knowing that person would just stop calling. But that person doesn't know that Pat said that because of that. He just believed that he didn't have a job because he didn't want to drop his pants or something. So I mean, is this something that head of talent relation should do nowadays? Of course not. It was back in the late 80s, early 90s, at a time where, it was run by a bunch of wrestlers that didn't know any better than what they had learned themselves in the business. Pat was self-taught. He was never, I mean, he was never an executive in the sense that he never had any degree. He was never coached by an HR person telling him what to do and what not to do and all that. He just did it by instinct. And that's what he decided to say and decided to do. But at the same time, it didn't make him sexual. He didn't harass young kids. That's like 1,000% positive. And the other stuff was sometimes just misinterpreted because he had a weird sense of humor, and it was another era. So that's why that when we started talking, Lee, it was never a matter to me that your brother was lying. I didn't think he was lying at all. It was just a way to interpret those things that Pat said or did, and to me that's a whole different story. So when I read that Pat was a monster, that's the line that made me flip. I was like, Pat was a monster. What? I mean, that was not the man he was. That was never the man
Now,
he
is
was.
is it true that you wrote a story defending Pat, and a company that you worked for refused to put that story up, and so you kind of parted their ways with them because of that?
Yes. So what happened is that Slam Wrestling is the biggest wrestling website in Canada. They are running for over 20 years, 25 years. 25 years. And I wrote for them, occasionally, not as much nowadays, but I used to write for them, part-time writer for them, part-time journalist for them. And there was a story that Jamie Hennings wrote following your brother's passing.
Yes.
And she had exchanged text messages with Tom, and she quoted Tom saying the line that you said about biting his lips, and there was a line where your brother said, yes, don't make any mistakes about it. Pat knew. Terry Garvin told me. And there was another line where he said that Pat knew. Pat exchanged booking for favors, or it wasn't said like this, but it was around those lines.
Right.
And I was like, but that never happened. And I mean, to be honest, if it's Terry Garvin who told your brother about that, I mean, I don't know when Terry Garvin became a reliable source. He was one of the two people who were like the real what's the word I'm looking for? They were the two guys that were harassing your brother, Terry and Phillips. So if it came from Terry's mouth, I don't believe a word of it, not a word. And it was probably just Terry trying to pin something on Pat, or not, putting him on himself. So when I read that, and then, because of that article, a lot of people started going online, and that's when I read the line about Pat being a monster. And I kind of flipped, and I contacted Slam Wrestling, and I was like, why did you leave that on? What did it add to Tom's story? And the story was about his tragic passing. To me, it was not a story about what happened. It was a story about his passing, and Pat, like you said, Pat's role in this was not the same as the other two. And you told me yourself, Lee, that your brother didn't kill himself because of Pat Patterson, and that's not I wasn't happy with. I mean, to me, that line was not needed in that story. It didn't make anyone any good. And I was like, why did you leave that on? And they were like, well, what can we do about it now? I said, well, first of all, you could remove those, but aside from that, you could. I mean, and I was offered to write something about it, so I did. I write something about and exactly what I told you guys. That was exactly what I put on paper. And then I was told, well, you cannot back up any of this with any proofs, so we won't let it run. But I said, but you let run. So it's okay to say that Pat knew about it, and it's okay to say that Pat exchanged sex for booking without any proofs. But it's not okay for me to trying to make a point about Pat not being this kind of person. I was really mad about that, and I decided to stop writing for them, to stop my association of 13 years with Slam Wrestling. And as a thank you for that, my name was removed from every single article I ever wrote for Slam Wrestling. Something that Slam Wrestling are telling me that they're going to fix, but it's been a few weeks now. And well, I didn't check recently, but the last time I checked, it wasn't fixed yet. So
I like to say one thing. I like to say one thing. If that's the case, if they took your name off everything, I would like to say that is wrong, and it shouldn't happen. You know, I can understand you guys having issues with one story, but you don't take away stuff that people wrote in the past. That's just wrong.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like I told you, Lee, you know, in writing and when we spoke over the phone, I'm really sad for you. I'm really sad for your family. I feel for you guys. I mean, 50 years old is way too young to die, and that has nothing to do with this. My whole thing was never to say that your brother was a liar, and it was never about Tom. It was never about that. And I really feel for you guys, and truly, again, because it's live, because it's on air, I'll say it again. But you know, you have my most sincere sympathies, and my thoughts and prayers are with you from day one. From day one, because I do believe that your brother went through hell. I just don't think that Pat Patterson was one of the person that caused that, or that he protect anyone.
And let me just say one thing with a couple things that I've talked to a few people about Pat, and they told me, and I'm just going to say this, I don't agree with it, but I got to say what I hear. They said that the majority of wrestlers support Pat Patterson.
Mm-hmm.
And also, Jamie, who wrote that story, has come out and said she doesn't know what to believe. She doesn't. Mm-hmm. She hasn't taken one side or the other, and she's come out and said that on several occasions. So I just wanted to get that out there. And if you guys want to ask a question,
Jimmy, I don't believe Jimmy ever met Pat.
Right.
But I mean, I don't have any problem with someone saying I don't know what to believe. I don't mind at all. If you don't know what to believe, it's okay. But what I don't like is when people are making false assumptions, or straight up saying that Pat was like this evil person. And there's like a lot of people who tried to say that about Pat in recent years, and they all ended up saying they were sorry, and that, you know, they should have never said that about Pat. You know, from Barrio to superstar Billy Graham to Murray Hodgson to, well, Murray never said that himself, but his lawyer did the job for him. So I mean, Pat was, and I told you this, Lee, you had to know Pat to better understand what I'm trying to explain myself now. But I wanted to make sure that it was out there, and I wanted to make sure that Pat would not be would not be remembered for something that he was not. That was the most important thing for me.
Well,
And look, this is
if you got Lee, if you want to take it from here,
yeah.
I
I
just
was
like to
gonna
say I
say,
appreciate you coming on the show tonight, and Lee will take it from here. I'm sorry, Zod will take it from here, but you are a wealth of information, and I hope that as my son's station gets bigger, you'll come back again and see us, and that and I'm looking forward to your hockey book because I really do like hockey.
And Lee, I want to thank you for the conversations we had in writing and on the phone and as well as this one. I know you told me that your idea of Pat has changed since we both talked, and I do appreciate that because coming from you, it means a lot. As a
Here's what
result,
I believe, plain and simple, what I believe about Pat. I believe that Pat was wrong in talking the way he did back then, but at the same time, sexual harassment in the workplace was common in every workplace. And if they did that nowadays, it wouldn't go on anywhere.
no.
Things change. Back in the 70s and 80s, you could be drunk and get pulled over in a car, and a cop will let you go. But if you get pulled over drunk in a car now, a cop will never let you go.
And
Things have just changed.
and you know what? Pat did adapt to that because those stories that we hear from the 80s, 90s, early 90s, you don't hear them after that. You
No.
don't hear them from the year 2000 or 2010. And Pat was a lot in the locker rooms. He was a lot involved with the talent. And himself, he had changed about that because times were changing too. So, but I do appreciate your openness about this, Lee. I
And just
wish
so you do
I wish
know,
things.
my son Zod, he this is his station, and he just let me talk a lot tonight, and I appreciate it. I like to say to him
oh
because
no,
he
I
just
mean, no problem.
he
Sometimes you just got to let the conversation go on its own. I like to take everything in before I say what I'm going to say, anyways, so I can hear both sides and kind of make my own determination
Oh
and
my
give a
gosh.
shout out
You're
to
gonna
Donald
say
Dolan.
something?
Oh yeah, Donald Dolan. Thank you so much. $10
Oh,
super
geez.
chat. He said, "Hey y'all, great stream, very entertaining and very informative." Yes, and I have a lot of people in the chat here that are good people who have been supporting my channel and things like that, and they've got some strong opinions in there. And look, I've said this before, and I'll say this again. I can't stand people who come on and try to defend someone with something that doesn't make sense or is illogical. Look, you hung out with Pat a lot. You've had conversations with him. I can only imagine what you all talked about, probably even stuff that no one else knows about, if I'm assuming right? Because you were hanging out with Pat, right? So I would imagine that you would have a great insight to things that even we may not know, or things that we'll never know about the man. Maybe some things, some inside jokes, some personal facts that we don't know. And look, this is my whole thing about it that frustrates me, and it's kind of where Father Zod was at, about who takes accountability for these things. And you know what, guys? Everybody in the chat, you're right. Pat's the right-hand man. But there is something that rings in my ear the whole time while I'm listening to you talk, and while I'm thinking back to those interviews with Linda and Vince. At the end of the day, and I feel this might play a little bit into it, but at the end of the day, Pat doesn't make the decisions, right? He's the right-hand man. He can make suggestions, but who really is making these decisions? Who's giving the okay? Because it's not going to be Pat, a wrestler. At the end of the day, the two people at the top, the people that keep the wheels running, is Vince and Linda McMahon. And I could see in my mind, I could see where you have this guy who's the right-hand man. He's gay, which is hard in those times as it is. You all remember the movie Philadelphia. I'm referencing it for a reason, because in that movie, the gay community was specifically targeted because it was easy. And my mom's gay. It's not an easy life. And when people are looking to shuffle the blame, there's a sense, especially nowadays, we love the gay community, right? Gay Pride Day, this and that. We would give them a whole big production, right? But then behind closed doors, where no one wants to talk about it, right? The dirty little secrets that everyone harbor inside. You might be like, you know what? I don't like that. I think it's disgusting. But no one's going to say that out loud. They're not going to come out and say that they're appalled by that, right? So I feel like it might be easy to also throw someone else under the bus who, yeah, they're misunderstood. They do these gestures and stuff and things like that, where in the public eye, now you got people who've been like, yeah, one time he made this joke at me. He made this pass at me. And the reason why I can understand that, and why that would be a sensible thing to come into the conversation, is because of the way the cancel culture is now. I mean, they're trying to get rid of a cartoon. That's where we're at in society. They're trying to erase books. So it's not out of the stretch of the imagination to remember or to have a community that has a stigma, especially in the 80s and the 90s. I remember the after school specials and everything else, gay people being beat up and things like that. It's not hard for someone to say, you know what? Yeah, we've got Garvin, we got Phillips, and let's just take it off of us and shift it onto Pat Patterson. He's the right-hand guy. He's the guy underneath Vince. The natural response for everyone, myself and my father included, is going to be like, hey, he's the right-hand man. Shouldn't he have known what was going on?
But if I may, Zad, if I just may add something here, well, two short things. What I was trying to say earlier on is that when that whole thing happened, Pat decided to quit because he knew that him being gay would bring a black eye to the company, because he was going to be an easy target. And some people have doubted the fact that Pat really quit, but he did, to the point that he had started to enroll himself to become a bartender. He had started to be trained as a bartender. To him, he was leaving the business and he would have never been back, because he knew that he could have never been back to the company because he was gay and because of what just happened with Garvin and Phillips. When Vince brought him back, Pat didn't want to go back at first. He said, Vince, you can't have me back. I mean, this thing will I'm going to bring a black eye to your company. And he goes, listen, Pat, I hired private investigators. They have talked to pretty much everyone in the company. You could run for president if you wanted to here. That's what Vince told Pat, and Pat was like, well, if it's really okay with everyone there, well, Pat had a love for pro wrestling. He wanted to come back, but he didn't want to. He was loyal to the company in the sense that he didn't want to be a burden for the company, right? So that's why he came back. The other thing I wanted to mention is that when you just said, well, he was Vince's right-hand man, so he must have known. There's another thing that happened a few years later called the Montreal Screwjob.
Yeah, I heard about this.
where Vince took the decision to go against what was planned and to get Brett to lose against Shawn Michaels. And Pat didn't know about that. Vince never told Pat before the event. And a lot of people were like, well, he was Vince's right-hand man. Why Vince didn't tell him? But Vince didn't tell him. So it was not like, because Pat was, the argument of Pat being Vince's right-hand man is not valid to me, because history has proved that Vince wasn't telling Pat everything. And
I mean,
if Vince knew about what was going on, and like I said, I don't want to talk for Vince. I'm only going to vouch for Pat here. But whatever Vince knew or did not know, Pat didn't. And it's not because he actually was Vince's right hand man that he must have known. That's, to me, that's not a valid argument. I understand the logic behind it, but it didn't happen. It could have happened, but it didn't happen. Pat knew a lot of stuff. He didn't know that.
So I missed all that.
So
so
It's stuff that we talk
I
on the
can
phone.
sum it up for you.
Yeah.
It's the old cliche: the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
Yep.
And this is a hard subject to talk about, and I appreciate everybody in the chat and everyone talking, and keep in mind too, one thing I like to do is I like to get both views and opinions. This is an interesting one to me because of the fact of to know fully what everyone knew. Well, no one was actually at that thing. We know for sure the two people most certainly involved in this. And in my mind, I hold Vince and Linda responsible, and I always will, because I don't believe anything happens in that building that Vincent Kennedy McMahon doesn't know about. He's a egotistical control freak to like the max. And I don't believe that man doesn't know anything that goes on in his company. The thing is, and this is probably, a little bit of a tougher question, but I got to ask it. When Pat knew about what was going on and this had all happened, was he in the mindset where he would say something about this or defend these kids who are victims, like come out and be like, say anything? Do you think he wanted to say something? Do you think he wanted to come out and be like, I feel for these guys, or try to championship, or just say something like, because he clearly didn't like Garvin or Phillips, or they weren't that close. So do you think he wanted to say, yeah, this guy's a scumbag? I feel bad for these kids. I mean, do you think it tore him up inside? Do you think he hurt when he found out about what was going on? Do you know of anything he might have done to reach out to these people? And you know what I mean? Because if he's a kind man, which I'm gathering from that, I'd imagine this would have weighed pretty heavy on him, especially the fact he was willing to leave the company to, steer off of him and not cause any trouble. Do you think he thought about it and he felt bad about the situation? He might have tried to reach out to these kids or do something.
I don't believe he tried to reach out to anyone because he didn't know. He probably didn't know who everyone was. I mean, from obviously your brother was made. The story of your brother was made public. But aside from him, he wasn't probably the only one. Well, not probably. He wasn't the only one.
No, he definitely wasn't.
Yeah, exactly. But I know that Pat didn't like. He didn't like that whole situation. He after that, he never really wanted to talk about Terry Garvin and Mel Phillips. He didn't agree with what they did. He didn't back them. He just wanted to do what he was doing best, and that was to help guys and girls performing in the wrestling world. And he wanted to concentrate on that. I'm sure that he felt sorry for everything that happened, but I don't think that it was his role to take the blame for that, or yeah. I mean, I never really had that specific conversation with him. but I know that he actually really felt bad about everything that happened. And when I say that he would have never let that go if he would have known, that I know of.
Well, one thing I could say about you, you're not, you know, one thing that I do know that I have in common with Pat Patterson. I have been made out to be called every name in the world by Jerry McDivitt. You know, I'm a criminal. He's a con man. He's a hustler. And, you know, they've said a lot of bad things about me over the last 30 years. And they continue to do it now by sending out emails and stuff and with stuff that is in my past. And I never claimed to be the perfect guy. I made a lot of mistakes in my life. But the one mistake that I didn't make is defending my brother, who I loved very much and had a very kind heart, and took his life. And, you know, I could say this now because my brother, you know, one of the things he had with all this depression, it was a brain tumor. So today I went to the hospital and they found a brain tumor in my head. So, you know, we have something in common. It's like we both had brain tumors at the same time. And I'm not sure what's going to happen with me. And, you know, I called my son from the hospital today. They wanted to transfer me up to another hospital and see if they had to do surgery right away. But then my neurologist came in and said he didn't think so. He wanted to take care of it. So they didn't send me to Lubbock and they let me go home tonight. I wasn't even going to be here. But I'm here because of that. And I just found it kind of ironic that what affected my brother at the end of his life is now going to affect me. So, you know, and I'm coming out and saying this too, Pat, no one knows. And I'm just saying it now. And so, you know, my journey is, I don't know what, you know, when you get a tumor, it can be 1 through 4 and you don't know what it's going to be. And I'm hoping it's a 1, but I'll know next week.
Oh, thank God you said it, because I've been holding this all day. Just so you guys know, if you see me on the other stream, I've been waiting to say this all day. I was on another stream with Rob Rules, and I found out. And if you guys saw, I went off camera for a bit, and then I came back on. I was actually on the phone with Dad when I found this out, which is why, Pat, this meant the world to me. I just didn't want to say anything because I was sworn to secrecy. Thank God you said that, because I told PB, I called him on the phone, you know, I was going to tell him he's my best friend. And I'm like, PB, I don't know what to do, because I'm sitting on this with like this weight on my chest. And I didn't know what to say. So this interview meant a lot. And it meant a lot to me, Pat, to get your side out. Because look, whether I agree or disagree with what you've said, right? At the end of the day, and everybody in the chat, and Nikki, thank you for the support. You've got some pretty loud comments there, and I appreciate it. But at the end of the day, guys, no matter what you believe, this man has a lot of guts and courage, unlike most media people. And if you follow my channel, I don't have a lot of respect for the new media, the way the new media does things. But I respect someone who's willing to come up to the plate and bring a good argument with them, right? And present some evidence. I think that speaks about a person's character. And the fact that you're a documentarian, that's kind of your thing, right? You're a documentarian. You deal with proof and facts. And, you know, you siphon through what you find out, and then you make your conclusion. It's what journalism used to be about. And I respect the fact that you're willing to come on and defend your point, just so you know. I respect the hell out of you for that, because there's not a lot of people who are willing to go and speak their point these days. They'll talk to you over Twitter, they'll yell at you through a DM, but they won't come and meet you face to face and state their point. So I really do respect that. And this means a whole lot, you coming on today.
Well,
and I've heard nothing but good stuff about you. You know, I have not heard bad stuff about you. And believe me, I checked, you know, because I had to. And
I
and
could
that's
I
one of the
could
reasons I want
I could give you a few names,
to.
but
Yeah, a lot of that is jealousy, I'm sure.
yeah.
And a lot of
And,
it is. You got successful books. You were part of a successful document. A show on HBO that is fantastic and brilliantly made. Did that win any Emmys?
no, unfortunately not.
I'm surprised. I'm really
Well, the
surprised,
Emmys are
actually.
rigged anyways these days.
But I just want to say, well, first of all, thank you so very much for what you just said, Zod. I really, really appreciate that. Truly, Lee, I'm speechless about what you just told us. I wish you all the best. I wish you a recovery, a speedy recovery, and hopefully everything will be all right. And my thoughts and prayers are with you right now, and for the next weeks and months and years. You can make sure of that. And
What was scary today? I just got to mention to you, when I was at the hospital, they called up one of the bigger hospitals and told them that they found a tumor in my head. And when they said that to the doctor, they said, "Is he awake right now?"
mm,
They acted as though where the tumor was, I shouldn't be functioning. And then then the doctor said, "No, he's walking around, he's functioning and everything." And then that's a good sign, because that means that it's just one of those things. You don't know what's going to happen until I sit down with my neurologist, and he comes and he'll let me know. But
I mean, hopefully it's true, and hopefully that's a good sign. Like I said, Lee, I really, really think about you now, and
I
hopefully
appreciate that.
everything will be fine. And thanks to all of you to let me express my point of view about Pat Patterson. And you were talking about Twitter and all that, and to me, maybe that's my old school side. Like, I'm 44 years old and I'm not just 20, and I knew what I lived before the internet, and to me there's never a better thing than a real conversation, whether it's on the phone or in
Yep.
person. So that's why when Lee suggested to after we had exchanged a few messages to call him, I was like, yeah, sure, of course I'll give you a
Yep.
call, and of course we'll talk, because to me there's no I mean, when you read something, you don't have the intonation, you don't have the real emotion that the person is trying to make into those words. But when you hear that person, it's a whole different story. And I think maybe that's where you and I, Lee, have in common, in the sense that you will defend your brother for what was done to him, and what he was saying, and in a sense I'm defending Pat from what a lot of person are saying about him, and we both believe that what the story that we're telling is the truth, because we knew those people, and everybody that is commenting online, 90%, if not higher than that, didn't know your brother, didn't know Pat Patterson. And to
Yep.
me, I mean, you can read stuff online, you can half read something online, and it's so easy to just go there and say something against this and that, without
Yeah.
trying to get the real story, without trying to get more than what is just in front of your face. And I appreciate the fact that you tried to better understand who was Pat Patterson.
Yes.
When you wrote to me and you told me, I'd like to talk to you because I'd like to know who Pat Patterson was, that's probably the line that made me do, like, yes, of course, Lee, I'll talk to you. because I appreciate the fact that you tried to at least understand who was Pat Patterson and why I was saying those things. And for that, I thank you. And hopefully there's more people who know more about that now. And I mean, I understand that I won't be able to change everyone's opinion, and some people will stay with their own what they believe it is their own truth, and that's fine. But I will always be there to make sure that Pat's reputation is not tainted, and I'm sure you're doing the exact same thing for your brother, and that's where that's where we join together, you know. So
Yeah, and
I do appreciate
and
that.
what and Pat and I, we have a lot of vicious things said about us, when people write. I see all this stuff said about me, but the fact of the matter is, my son right here, he's a good man. He works hard. Well, he works. I don't know about hard. And
Hey,
he's just a good.
those teenagers can run quick.
He's a good
Don't
kid.
underestimate those 11,
So,
year olds.
out of everything I've done in my life, being a father and how my son is my greatest accomplishment. So, people can say whatever they want, but can they look at their son who's in their 30s and say, my son's never done drugs. He's never been in jail, never been in trouble with the law. He has his own little station here. He knows how to speak well. So, they can say whatever they want about me. Yeah, well, you keep a good eye on him. He needs that. So, it's yeah. PB is like this. We don't even know who PB is. He just showed up one day as a meme, whatever you call it, a gift or and yeah. So
just an avatar.
An avatar. He showed up as an avatar. So we have an avatar on our show. But I'm proud of what my son is, and so that people could say whatever they want. And Vince could say the same thing. Vince might be able to say, I'm proud of how my daughter and my son is. So I don't know if you have any children.
Unfortunately, not.
No.
No.
Well, you're young yet. My father had 11
talk
kids.
like that. You could have had a kid like Zod here.
Oh yeah, the little dictator. That's gonna be
my kids are my books. That's where I spend all my time.
Oh no.
Yeah, but you're 44 years old. When my father had no kids until he was 34, and then he had 11.
My dad
he was making kids in his 50s.
My dad had me at 45.
Yeah.
So there you go.
And now you have an excuse to find a young woman.
Yeah.
I hope I didn't say that. I hope I didn't say that, and your partner's listening, saying, "I hope he better not." Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this, and I hope that I get to do many more of these shows. And one thing I learned, because of where my tumor is, I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm going to enjoy every one of these, and I'm going to document. I decided I'm going to do a documentation on my illness, and I'm going to put it to, I'm twice a week. I'm going to be doing a show for my son here, and I'm going to kind of talk about my journey through this the tumor and stuff, and kind of talk about it, just to put it out there, because people have to deal with this all the time, And all of a sudden, tumors never were in our family. Then my brother had one. It helped him kill himself, and now I do. So, and now I found out it runs in my family, that people a couple generations ago used to get them. So I guess you just don't know. But thank you for everything. I really appreciate you being on.
Well, thanks for the invite again, and thanks for the sharing, and again, my thoughts with you, with little Zod, and your grandchildren, and everybody in your family. And
yes, I appreciate that.
Hoping we can do another one of these in a year or 2 years and all that. And I wish you all the best, honestly.
And we can talk about your hockey. We can talk about your hockey book.
Definitely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
I appreciate it.
So yeah, thank you everybody. That was a tough segue to get into. Thank
I'm
you
going to
for
take
coming
off,
up.
Clay.
All right, I'll see
See
you
you.
later.
Oh, I
See you
thought he
guys.
was
Thank
already
you.
gone.
But yeah, like I said, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's been a rough it's been a rough going into 2021 kind of a deal, and I really appreciate you taking the time out. This is the part of the show where I like to let people promote things. So, what do you got coming? What big things you got going on, and where can they find you and follow you and things like that?
They can follow me on every social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Pat Laprade. They can find any of my books. So Mad Dogs, Mischief, and Screwjobs, The Untold Story of How Montreal Shaped the World of Wrestling. Mad Dog Vachon, the Mad Dog, the Maurice Vachon story. Sisterhood of the Squared Circle, which is the history of women's wrestling, as well as The Eight Wonder of the World, the true story of Andre the Giant. They can all find those books on Amazon.com or any Amazon, wherever you live, .ca, .uk, whatever. And yeah, so feel free to give me a follow. To buy one of the books, to comment on them, ask me any questions. I'm always there to talk some wrestlings with the fans out there.
Yeah, and we've got the best mod in the world. I'm so sorry, Cherry. Like, I never give her any of this information, but she always finds it. I'm telling you. She says, "Don't put me on the payroll," but I'm going to, Cherry. I'm going to because you are
There's a
one of the best mod
payroll.
members. we gotta put Cherry K on the payroll.
You didn't, PB, you didn't know there was a payroll?
No, man, I sent him how many invoices?
See?
If you don't know, Pat, I've been doing this channel for like 3 years. Uh, PB here basically helped me build a whole program and has been with me since the beginning. He was my 100th subscriber. And, it's a funny story. I was driving. I'm like, man, I'm 99 away and I need 100 subs. And I'm sitting here like talking and he goes, okay, boop. And there you go. I made it to 100. So PB was my 100th sub and now my co-host. So, you know, it's crazy to think of where we started when we only had like 2 or 3 people watching and it was us to like now we've had like 20 some people, will have 30 people, sometimes 40, and it's crazy to think about the journey. So it's awesome that I was able to sit here and have a great conversation with you and go back and forth. And I've always said, like, this channel, I want to be about, even if I don't agree with an opinion, everyone is allowed to speak their opinion. People in the chat are allowed to, because the problem we have today is nobody wants to do this. They don't want to talk, even debate. You can have a healthy debate and you might leave not agreeing with the person, but you can still be friends with them. And that's what people fail to get in this new age. So it was great to have you on, because I might still not, totally co-sign on everything, but I respect your opinion and I respect you for coming on here. And you're always welcome back on, because that's what it should be about. We should all be, as creators, promoting that. We should be promoting healthy dialogue. We should be promoting arguing with each other. Well, not arguing, but debating, having a difference of opinions. And it's like since 2015, people forgot that. They forgot about the art of having a good conversation, of having the little back and forth. It used to be fun for me when I was in the debate class, and PB loves debating with me all the time. Right, Mr. PB?
I mean, it's nice to always know that you're going to have a win when you start a debate.
My friends would say I'm a good debater as well, so I like to debate. So I feel you here, and yeah, again, well, thank you for letting me express what I had to say about that whole situation. It doesn't make up for what happened to your uncle. It doesn't make up to what happened to a lot of people, but at least I wanted to make sure that there was a voice given to Pat in all this, and thank you for the opportunity. I really really appreciate that.
No problem. And you follow me. We got the DMs. Anytime you want to pop back on here, you're always welcome. The co-host, the commander, the person who keeps this villain in line, Pop Culture PB. Do you got an after party going on, or what's the deal later?
I don't know. I haven't decided yet.
I'm gonna be bored at work when I'm supposed to be doing my job. Come on.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna be bored at work? Well, then maybe in like an hour or something like that. Because I'm sure we're gonna get done with this, and you're gonna talk to me for another freaking half an hour or something. Oh my god!
Believe me, guys, there's no after party here because in Montreal we have a curfew because of the COVID thing. So 8 p.m. we had to be in. So I cannot go anywhere now before without having a $1,500 ticket. So I'll stay.
Holy shit!
Yeah. So I'll stay home watching some Netflix.
Well, there you go. If you need some choices, we both know a couple of shows. I'll give you some good stuff to look over. Entertainment's my thing. So, anyways, thank you guys for watching. Go check PB's channel out. Go check out Pat. Go check out his books and definitely.
Don't you have a second channel?
Oh yeah, and go check out the second channel, The Prophets of Geek Culture, where we talk about everything. And one day I'll do another comic book review.
Doubtful.
On that channel. But we got a couple of things coming up we're going to be doing through the week. I'll let you guys know. I'm talking to some other people to get on here on the channel. So I'm just going to kind of chill for these next 2 days because I got a lot of things you guys heard that I'm sorting through. So I'm just going to take a break for a bit, maybe pop on a couple of other channels. But the girl wants me to spend time with her, and you all know how that goes. So I'm going to be spending time with the girl and just relaxing. But thank you, everybody, for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation, let everybody else know. Share, like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. Go spread it across the interwebs, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. MySpace, I think that still exists. Everywhere.
Oh my gosh.
Friendster?
Friendster. Oh, Jesus. Oh my God, I forgot about that. I remember when I was a kid, and it was like, and then MySpace came out, and you're like, oh, you can make your own background with the music. And now look where we're at. Jesus, I feel old. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. And as always, remember the only rule here in the Fandom Zone: kneel before Zod.
No.
Darkness will fall.